You are watching Executive Functioning TV. Coming up next on Leadership Brains, the leader's brain, how you might be derailing your team without even being aware of it. Specific examples, real frameworks, a tools demo, and answering questions that get asked most often when it comes to leadership and executive functioning. I'm Kristina Proctor, your host of Leadership Brains. Leadership Brains is sponsored by Neurodivergent Ventures, where your unique mind is your greatest asset. Coming up on Leadership Brains, we're going to be talking about leadership, specifically how your brain as a leader impacts productivity and the functioning of every single person who works with you, not just the team that you directly might manage. We're going to dive into specific examples, things you might be doing right now that are creating friction for your team, as well as the things that you may not be realizing that you're doing that negatively impact them. So I'm going to show you live what actually some fixes that you can use to support yourself and support your teams. And then we're going to get into some questions that I get asked in trainings from leaders, one-on-ones, managers, people who are working with neurodivergent teams, as well as people who are not sure. What I've realized is that a lot of the tools that work for neurodivergent teams work for everybody. So grab your coffee, hop on your walking pad if you have one, and join me for this episode of Leadership Brains. Have you ever watched yourself become the reason your team couldn't follow through? Not because you're a bad leader, not because you didn't care, not because your team wasn't talented or capable, but because somewhere in between your intentions and your actual expectation, your own executive function challenges were showing up in behavior of the people around you, and nobody was naming it. I want to be really direct right here at the top. This episode is not how to be a nicer person. It is not about emotional intelligence. This is not that type of content today, and it's not generic in a feel-good way. This is about your brain. Specifically, how the way your brain manages, plans, follows through, and transitions is landing on your team every single day, whether you know it or not. Here's the thing I need you to hear before we go any further at all. I have been on both sides of this. I have been a leader who was creating friction. That's definitely something that I've been guilty of. And I have been the person on teams absorbing it from my own leader. So this is not coming from a place of judgment at all. I want you to know that. It's coming from a place of knowing exactly how this happens. And I do also know exactly what you can do about it today, so you can do better than I did. I want to start here because it sets up everything else in this episode. When I'm working with organizations, HR leaders, directors, management teams, the conversation almost always starts the exact same way. They come to me and they say, we have a productivity problem. We have an interpersonal challenges that it's impacting output, or we have a communication problem. And the most common one, we have a follow-through problem. You have staff that can start tasks, but getting to the endpoint is difficult. What I find almost every single time is that it's actually a brain mismatch problem overall. I talked in episode 1 of Leadership Brains about how the system was not built for how your brain works. But I want to go deeper into that today because it applies just as much to leadership behavior as it does to the tools specifically that you're using. So when a team's follow through is inconsistent, most leaders assume it's a motivation issue. So they talk about motivating staff and really wanting to get them motivated to do the work, to identify with the mission. When communication keeps breaking down, most leaders assume it's a clarity or a personality issue. When people are not taking the initiative, most leaders assume it's an engagement issue or it is a moral issue. This person's just not willing to work. Things like that. And the reality is that most cases, it's not either of those things. It really is executive functioning mismatch between how the leader operates and what the team's brains actually need to succeed. So what does that even mean? What does that look like? So here's what executive functioning is doing in your leadership right now. And whether you have thought about this or not, every time you communicate to a task, this is a working memory handoff. So if you are just verbalizing something directly to your staff, they have to rely on their working memory, which is an executive functioning skill, to process that and remember that. So every time you change direction, that is a task initiation demand you're placing on your team. Every time you skip an explanation and jump to the solution, that is a processing demand. Most leaders don't understand that. So every time the environment that you create is unpredictable, whether you're going to have a verbal direction, a processing demand because you're jumping to the solution instead of working through the problem and to show them how to work through a problem, that is a massive mental load on the executive functioning skills of your staff. So every time you continuously remain unpredictable, now you're in the space of emotional overload for them, which is not what you want. That's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to be productive, focus, and have open communication. I first want to say none of those things are malicious. You're not trying to be ineffective or unproductive with your team. None of this is intentional. They are the downstream effect of a leader's own executive functioning. So strengths and challenges are on both sides, but they're showing up in the environment that you as a leader or your leaders create. So, and here's the really important piece I want you to walk away with today. Executive functioning challenges are not limited to people with ADHD or autism diagnosis or any diagnosis at all. Anybody can have an executive functioning challenge. Executive functioning can be strained by grief. It can be strained by overwhelm, by burnout, by being in a new role, by being a new parent, by high stress, by a difficult season at home in general. So, which means that the leader who is running on absolutely empty and is completely overloaded, whether it's you or someone above you or someone on your team, it's going to show up and compromise what you're trying to achieve. It's going to compromise planning. It's going to compromise follow through. It's going to compromise communication every single time in some form or fashion. It's just going to. So before we dive into specific patterns that you're looking for, I want you to hold that frame. Just hold it. This is not about who specifically is broken. This is about understanding the mechanism and changing the environment, knowing what to watch for, because that is what actually moves teams forward, is learning how to change the environment. And that could be the environment that you use for your approach. So that is what we're starting with. When I was working in corporate, I was a leader, I was a manager. I genuinely thought what I was doing was right. I was responsive. I cared about my team. I said yes to everything. Don't do that. Just heads up, don't do that. I said yes to everything because I wanted to feel supportive of our goals, of our colleagues, of our different business units. I wanted to be that leader. I communicated constantly. I felt accessible. I felt really clear. And then I started to see the problem. The things I was doing that I thought were being helpful, a lot of them were adding a cognitive load to people around me, whether people that reported to me or colleagues or different parts of the organization. A lot of them were adding cognitive load. So I was creating confusion. I was modeling habits that I would never, ever tell someone else to model. Here's a real example. I used to send messages to my team at night, not because I expected them to respond at 11 o'clock at night. I did not. In my mind, I was just getting things off of my plate, getting things started, getting it out of my head was what I needed. But I did not think about what I genuinely did not register, is that every one of those messages was landing in somebody's inbox and activating their own nervous system. I just assumed that they had to manage themselves. They had to manage what that was like. instead of me thinking about how it impacted them. Even if they did not open it, it activated their nervous system. So even if, they promised themselves they would look at it in the morning, the ding, the notification is still coming through. The question was still there. And it was borrowing from their mental bandwidth before their workday even started. Heck, it was borrowing from their bandwidth after they had even ended their workday. So they were trying to go home to their family. And that was on me. I thought I was just being efficient. I was actually doing what I was supposed to do. Instead, I was creating low-grade ambient stress to everyone around me, my boss, my colleagues. That is executive functioning modeling. That is the mechanism I want you to understand. Your team is watching how you do tasks. They're watching you how you communicate expectations. They're watching how you respond when something unexpected shows up. They're watching you when your stress spikes. They're watching you whether you have had said a single word about executive functioning or neurodivergent. Your team is watching how you start tasks. They're watching how you communicate expectations. They're watching how you respond when something changes unexpectedly. They're watching what you do when your stress and everybody's stress spikes. They're watching. They're very much present. And whether you have ever said a single word about executive functioning or neurodiversity or cognitive load, they're learning from you every single day. Every day, doesn't matter. I talked about this in a previous episode. Your team is watching how you start tasks. And I talked about starting tasks and modeling through the context of parenting in a previous episode. Kids borrow regulation from adults around them. When an adult pauses and regulates, children often settle their own nervous system faster when they start to see that over and over. It's important that we see that. Teams work the same way. So teams borrow regulation from the leaders around them. And when you are dysregulated, your team directly feels it. When you are unclear, your team operates on that exact same uncertainty. It's wild. So if you are inconsistent and don't have follow through, your team's going to struggle with it too. Your team will mirror your leadership back to you. That is not blame. That is the mechanism that we're working within. Okay? So before we go any further, I want you to sit with one single question. Now, what are you intending to model? What is actually landing for you right now? And if you genuinely are not sure, you don't know the answer to that, that's actually pretty useful information because it means that the feedback loop in your team is not working. That's information that you can use. And we're going to talk about how to fix that too. Okay, I promised specific examples and I am going to deliver. These are the 3 patterns I see most often when I'm working with leaders. And these are the ones that almost never show up on standard leadership training. Number 1, you're giving verbal instructions only. This one's so common, you guys. So you pull someone in for a real quick conversation in the hallway. You mention something at the tail end of a meeting when people are already closing their notebooks and their laptops. Or you send a short message that says, hey, can you handle this thing by Thursday? Your brain knows exactly what the thing is. You've been holding it. You have the absolute full context. Their brain, however, has to capture the verbal input. They have to hold it to working memory, prioritize it alongside of everything else they have already going on and already managing, and then they have to retrieve it accurately on Thursday with no written record, nothing attached, no anchor to go back to. That is an enormous cognitive ask. And here's what you need to understand about working memory, because we talked about executive functioning earlier in other episodes, and I want to connect this now to a leadership context. Working memory is the part of the brain that holds information temporarily while you are using it. Think of it like your brain's whiteboard. It can only hold so much at once. And this is one of the first things that degrades under stress. It can only hold so much at one time. And it is one of the first things that goes down quickly. So if your team member is already at capacity, and a lot of people are, that instruction may genuinely not make it to Thursday. Not because they didn't try, but because you gave it to them without any external system attached to it. Now, add in that the reality is that 15 to 20% of your workforce is neurodivergent, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and it goes on. It's a big umbrella. And neurodivergent brains often have working memory challenges that are compounded with high stimulation environments that are honestly like most workplaces. So when you give a verbal only instruction to someone, say with ADHD, or are experiencing bouts of executive dysfunction, maybe they're a new parent, maybe they have a lot of stress already, or maybe they're just genuinely overwhelmed, you are not giving them a task. If you do that to them, you're giving them a test of their working memory under conditions that are already not ideal at all. This fix is absolutely not complicated. What you're going to do is this. Follow up every verbal instruction with something in writing. It can be 2 sentences in Teams. It could be a quick email, an Asana card, whatever system your team actually uses. 2 pieces of information. What does done look like? And when does it need to happen by? That's it. I'm going to show you exactly how to make this fast in the tools segment because there's a way to do it in about 90 seconds that requires almost no executive functioning on your end. Number 2, you are changing priorities mid-sprint. I hear you right now. I know things can change, client shift, leadership redirects. You are always, or not always, in control when the pivot happens. Sometimes that is absolutely not your call. I get it. I'm not here to tell you that change is bad. Not what we're doing here. But here is what is happening neurologically when you redirect your team without a real conversation. Your team is already allocating their working memory and their planning energy toward the current priority. They have tasks that are already in motion. Decisions are in progress. A mental picture of what success looks like for this sprint, this week, this project. When the priority shifts without any warning, especially, and without any acknowledgement of what they were just working on, that brain does not smoothly redirect. It has to stop, drop what it's holding, take in new information, and rebuild the plan. And doing all of that while managing whatever emotional response comes with it. Frustration, confusion, feeling that the work they just invested a lot of real energy into did not matter. That costs energy and, quite frankly, a very significant amount. And when that happens repeatedly, people stop investing in anything, in one thing. They just stop. Not because they decided to check out or they're not engaged, but because their nervous system learned. They learned from repeated patterns that it might all change before they finish anyway. So they kind of stop caring. And here's another part that is really hard to see from the leader's seat. The disengagement that follows repeated unacknowledged pivots does not look like disengagement at first. It looks like compliance. People start saying yes more and executing less. They stop asking clarifying questions and they complete tasks to a minimum standard because going deep stopped feeling worth it. And from where you're sitting, that can look a lot like motivation problems or quality problems when it's actually a trust issue. Trust in the stability of the direction that they're going. So when a priority genuinely has to shift, what do? You name the change. You name it clearly. You acknowledge what the team was just working on before the pivot. Give them space to voice the friction and then frame the new direction together. We are going to build a full framework for this in a future episode, but the acknowledgement, that is what most leaders skip. And that is where disengagement starts. Number 3, you are solving problems before your team has a chance to try. This one might land harder, and I say that with all the love I have. If you are a high performer, if you have a strong executive functioning skill in certain areas, if you are a person who tends to see the solution before anyone else in the room does, you've probably built a real habit around moving fast to the answer. And that is genuinely a strength. Full stop. It genuinely is a strength. Your brain is good at pattern recognition. You have experience. You can shortcut a lot of the confusion that other people are still working through. That is real. Until it becomes the pattern that teaches your team that their thinking does not count. That sucks. When you jump to the solution before your team has a chance to work through the problem, you're taking away the reps they need to build their own capacity. You're creating dependency instead. You're creating dependency without meaning to. That's not intentional for you. And here is what dependency looks like from the inside of a team. People start bringing you problems without having gone through them at all first. Why would they? Why would they go through them first? You're going to redirect them anyway. So stop doing the cognitive work up front and look around and wonder why no one is thinking independently. I have done this. I have done this in real time. I've watched myself do this. A team member starts explaining a situation, and I'm already nodding because I can see where it is going. And I'm already building the answer in my head. And I have to stop myself and say, Kristina, let them get there. The practice is simple and incredibly hard. Before you give the answer, ask a question first. What have you tried so far? What would you do if I were not available right now? What does done look like for you? Give them the space to think out loud before you fill in with your answer. And sometimes, honestly, their answer is better than yours. That's hard to hear, I'm sure, but their answer could be better than yours because they're closer to the execution. Their thinking is valid. It just needs some space to develop and breathe. This is leadership modeling. This is how you build a team that does not need you for everything. 3 patterns, 3 ways things break down. Now, here is what you actually do about it. Not just awareness, but action. The first thing I want to give you is a question, and it sounds almost too simple, and I promise you it is absolutely not too simple. Before you assign any task to anyone on your team, ask yourself this. Does this person know what done looks like? Not what the task is, what done looks like. Is the outcome a document or a verbal update? Is it a first draft that goes to you for review, or is it a final version ready to send? How long should this reasonably take, given everything else on their plate? What resources do they have access to complete this task? Who do they go to if they get stuck? Where does it go when it is finished? When you assign a task without a clear picture of what done looks like, you are asking someone's brain to fill in every one of those blanks on its own. And the image they build may not match yours at all. And then when it comes back and it is not what you expected, you both feel something went wrong. And nothing actually went wrong. The expectation was just never made visible. We talked about this before in a previous episode, but we're going to elaborate a little bit more on this here. In the context of personal planning, asking yourself what done looks like before you start a task is critical. The same principle applies here with leadership as well. Make done visible before anything else gets assigned. That practice alone reduces rework, reduces the back and forth between team members or you and them, and it reduces conversations that are eating into your specific calendar. The second framework is an exercise I use with every team I work with. It's called I Work Best When. It is genuinely just a sheet, a paper doc, or a PDF that you can fill in. It's super simple. You and every person on your team answers a few questions. What type of work do you do? Deep focus? What helps you work best? Collaboration, administration, creative? How do you work? What are the domains of your role? For each one, what conditions do you need to work well? What type of environment do you need to work well? The time of day, the noise level, the different tools that you need. What does that look like for you? Then we ask a question most people skip. What derails you? The specific things that knock you off track completely. Unexpected schedule changes, vague directions, back-to-back meetings with no transition time, many decisions before noon. Name it. Be very specific. And then, how do you want to communicate your specific needs to people around you? What do you actually want your manager to know? What do you want your team to understand about how you work as a leader? That last question is one that changes rooms, because when people actually write down, when they articulate it, most of them realize they have never once been given permission to say that at work. And when they share it with their team, something genuinely shifts, because now, instead of everyone guessing why someone works differently, they know. They told you, and you told them. I use this in corporate workshops, 30, 45 minutes. It changes how managers give feedback and how teams extend each other grace permanently. And if you're a leader thinking, that sounds awfully useful, but I don't have time for a workshop, start with yourself first. Do your own I Work Best When sheet this week, because you cannot build an environment that supports your team's brains if you do not understand what your brain needs. This is a people first principle. Start there. Last thing before we get into tools, and I said I was going to address this, is how to work within the context of change. Because if you are a leader right now, you are leading through it. AI rollouts, restructuring, new processes, team transitions, maybe all of those things at once. Here is what most organizations get wrong about change. And I say this as someone who has been inside organizations and made this mistake myself. It takes on average 66 days to form a new habit. And 43% of your waking behavior is habitual. So when you roll out a new system or a new tool or a new way of working and expect relatively fast adoption, you are asking people to consciously interrupt nearly half of their automatic daily behavior and replace it with something completely unfamiliar, using executive functioning resources that are already being spent on everything else in their day. That, my friend, takes time. That takes real support. And it takes a leader who names the friction out before it shows up on a team's behavior, because it's coming whether you name it or not. I will tell you what I see in teams and in organizations. A new initiative gets launched. There's a kickoff meeting. There are slides. There's enthusiasm from leadership. And then 6 weeks later, someone asks how adoption is going, and the answer is people are kind of using it, the new tool. Some haven't really gotten on board. Some are really slow to pick it up. Some might need another training. This is not a training problem. This is a change management problem. That is what happens when humans inside a change initiative were not accounted for before the initiative actually launched. So before your next change initiative, I want you to ask 3 questions. Number 1, have I stated this change clearly? What is actually changing? when, and why in plain language, not corporate synergy jargon, okay? In language someone can understand in one read while juggling their 3 other priorities that they have. Okay, question number 2. Have I acknowledged what this means for the people doing the work? Not strategically. What this means for someone's actual Tuesday, for the project they're currently in the middle of, or for the muscle memory that represents 43% of their day. And we finally have number 3. Have I created space for friction? A real structured moment where people can surface what is hard before they go underground with it. Again, have I created space for friction? This is where most people skip. They just expect their staff to absorb all of the friction because underground friction does not disappear. We know this. It comes back as a rollout that technically happened but never actually changed anything. State it, acknowledge the impact, state it, acknowledge it, invite the friction. We will build out the entire framework in a future episode. Those are the 3 things I want you to use as your foundation right now. I promised you tools and we're going to dive into it. This is probably one of my favorite parts of doing trainings is getting into the action. And it's important to have some of the background we went over. It's tool time. This is one of my favorite parts of the show because I don't want to just tell you what to do. I want to show you. Everything I'm going to walk through right now is something I actually use with clients, with myself. And these are not theories. I didn't just Google some ideas. These are things that I have actually tested and I've used with all sorts of different groups. I want to frame the tool conversation this way, though, to kick off, because I talked about this in another episode and it applies even more here. Tools come third in your process. Not first, not second, third. First is people, how they work best. Second is all about the systems, the process. That's the second. Tools are third. The system is making the expectations clear. The tool makes the system fast enough that you'll actually use it. Okay? The tool makes the system fast enough so you'll actually use it. So let's dive into tool number 1. Tool 1, using ChatGPT to write crystal clear task instructions. Here's the problem. You know what you mean when you assign a task. Your brain has all the context, but translating that context into written instruction that someone can act on and not follow up with 15,000 questions is something that takes a different type of mental organization that is hard for us. So what ends up typically happening is that leaders skip the write-up, the follow-up completely, entirely for their teams, not because they don't care, that's not what we're saying, but because sitting down and writing things out feels like one more thing on an already very full plate. So they give verbal instruction, they move on, Thursday rolls around, and then nothing is done. So here's what I recommend to do instead. I use a simple ChatGPT prompt to turn my very messy brain into a very clear task instruction in about 90 seconds. The prompt sounds something like this. I need to assign a task to my team member and want to make sure the instructions are clear. Here's what I know, and then I just brain dump all the things I know. Messy is fine. And I might say, I just need staffer to pull together a summary of last quarter's client feedback. I think it should be in a doc. It's for leadership meeting on the 15th. It is the 10th right now. Probably 1 to 2 pages, just the themes, nothing too detailed yet. Then I say, turn this into a clear task instruction with a definition of done, a deadline, and any context Jordan or my staffer will need to complete this without asking me follow-up questions. What comes back is something I can paste directly into a Teams message or an email. Then I say, turn this into a clear task instruction with a definition of done, a deadline, and context the staffer would need to complete this without asking me follow-up questions. What comes back is something I can paste directly into Teams or send in as an email or put in Slack. In 2 of the 3 paragraph summary with a clear outcome, a defined done, and a deadline, as well as context. It takes 90 seconds. I'm not formatting this. I'm just taking and talking, and the tool does the formatting. This is a tool aligned system. The system makes done visible before you assign anything. The tool makes it fast enough that you can actually do it. Okay, tool number 2, Goblin Tools for structuring change communication. I introduced Goblin Tools, and I've talked about this tool before. It's really all about personal task breakdown. And I want to show you it from a leadership angle because it's underused for this. When I need to communicate change to my team and I feel that vague pressure, I know I need to say something. I just cannot quite find the structure. I put the communication into Goblin task and go. Something like communicate the new client intake process change to the team in a way that addresses what is changing, why, and what people need to do differently starting Monday. I set the spiciness to medium or high, depending on how much my brain needs to scaffold that day, and it gives me a step-by-step breakdown. Step 1, write the sentence describing exactly what is changing. Step 2, write one sentence about why. Step 3, list the specific actions people need to take differently. So now I have some structure as a leader, which is important for me. I'm not starting a blank message thread, trying to figure out where to even start. This gives me a starting point, which improves my ability to begin. It improves my task initiation, which is an executive functioning skill. This matters for leaders specifically because the changes you need to communicate are often the task with the highest stakes and the highest initiation difficulty, because there's an emotional weight to them, and you know there will be, especially when it involves your teams. You're trying to get that tone right while being clear, while not creating panic. This is a lot of competing demands on your executive functioning all at once. Goblin Tools helps remove that, and it's structural friction so your brain has more capacity for what really matters. All right, tool number 3, AudioPen for getting it out of your head. This one keeps coming back because it has changed my leadership communication more than almost anything else. AudioPen, and you can natively do this also in ChatGPT with the voice feature as well. It's a recording tool, AudioPen is. And so where you press one button and just start talking. When you stop, it transcribes what you said and gives you a clean, organized summary. And again, you can do this in ChatGPT. You could do a voice memo to yourself and put it into ChatGPT. Here's how I use it for leadership. When I have a thought about a team member, a piece of feedback, or a task I want to assign, a question I need to follow up on, any of those things, instead of it living in my head, I record it in AudioPen or a voice memo right away, 30 seconds. The next morning, I have a cleaned up version that I can actually use and start with. This does 2 things. It gets us through my working memory, so I'm not having to hold on to it, which is challenging for my working memory. It stops taking up space, so to speak, and it gives me a moment of intentional distance, because by the time I'm reading the cleaned up version of what I had the next morning, I have a little bit more perspective on whether that message is really ready to send versus being impulsive, an executive functioning skill, versus being impulsive and just sending it out anyway. So that is a tool, voice memo, AudioPen, that you can use to support your working memory and in turn your emotional regulation as well as your impulsivity. All of those at the same time, both of which are all executive functioning skills that we've talked about. All right, tool number 4. This is another AI using ChatGPT to build the I Work Best When sheet for your team. If you are wanting the I Work Best When worksheet, you can email me. I'll put it up right here on the screen. Shoot me an email. I'll send it to you. No strings. I've talked about the I Work Best When exercise earlier, and I want to make it real because lots of leaders nod along and then never implement it. And they get stuck on what the sheet should look like. So here's what you can do. You pop into ChatGPT and you say, I want to run a 30-minute I Work Best When exercise with my team. You can create a simple one-page worksheet with 5 sections: work domains, what I need for each domain, what derails me, what helps me recover. This is one we didn't talk about earlier, what helps me recover, and what I want the people around me to know, how I want to communicate it. That's what that's about. Plus a brief facilitator guide for how to run the sharing conversation at the end. It will give you something you can use immediately. Honestly, print it or send it as a doc, and that 30 minutes will tell you more about how to support your team than a year of performance reviews. I said what I said. I am standing on that. Those are the 4 tools I would like to pass on to you. If you are wanting to level up your professional game, start with executive functioning skills. One of the ways I support my own brain is through reading and collaboration. Reading is something that I struggled with early on as a vulnerable point for me. I have dyslexia and ADHD, and I'm always wanting to learn more about how my brain learns. So I want to recommend a book to you, and I'll zoom it in this frame, and it's Executive Functioning Workbook for Adults. Highly recommend this workbook. I wanted to share it with you mostly because these exercises are so accessible, and it's not specifically for anybody with a certain diagnosis. So when we talk about executive functioning, most of the time on the internet, people talk about kids. They don't talk about adults and our needs for executive functioning support. We are often taught about executive functioning skills within the context of paying attention in class or planning our day using an agenda. Yes, those are all parts of things that involve executive functioning. But what we don't often get to do is learn more about what executive functioning looks like that is supported at work. And it drives me nuts. It drives me nuts because people do better when they know better. So that is a part of my continuing education and learning, is working through my different executive functioning skills as an adult. And this is something that has opened my eyes in the past 2 years, is a book like this. And period, end of story. If you have people you're wanting to follow that talk a lot about being a leader in an organization or a manager, Grace McCarrick on TikTok is fabulous. She teaches soft skills. Soft skills overlap so well with executive functioning. A lot of them are very similar. So those soft skills and then learning executive functioning, those are the skills that you're going to need moving into the next generation of work with AI, LLMs, language learning models. AI is able to give us so much. And we, through our executive functioning skills, are able to practice pause and discernment. And that is a soft skill that is necessary, and you are not able to discern without your executive functioning skills. So this is my commercial for you to support your brain by learning more about your own needs with executive functioning. If you are looking for support with your team in your executive functioning, feel free to shoot me an email. One of the things, if you are not knowing where to start, get the Executive Functioning Workbook for Adults. As leaders, it is our responsibility to constantly grow and challenge our staff. It is incredibly difficult for them to learn and grow if our own executive functioning skills are not on point. If you are looking to improve your soft skills, your emotional intelligence, executive functioning skills align all of those. Support your brain, support your staff. Start with your executive functioning skills. I'm Kristina, your host of Leadership Brains, right here on Executive Functioning TV. I look forward to seeing you next episode. Okay, I want to spend the rest of this episode doing something a little bit different. I want to read some questions to you, questions I get asked most often by leaders specifically, and also by managers and people who work with different types of teams with all sorts of different types of needs. And some of these have come through DMs. Some of them have come from workshops I've run. Some of them I've asked myself when I'm trying out these tools. Let's dive in. So question 1, I think I have ADHD, but I have never been diagnosed. Does that matter when it comes to frameworks you're teaching? I love this question, and the short answer is no, it does not matter. And here's why. So, the frameworks in the show or in my business, Neurodivergent Ventures, is all about people, systems, tools. What does done look like? I work best when. These three questions or those areas of focus, the three questions before change initiative, none of those required diagnosis to be useful at all. I created them within the context of supporting people with neurodivergent brains, and in the process, learned that they were beneficial for people regardless of brain type. So, having a diagnosis can be clarifying for people. It can give you language for the experience that you have, and it can open access to accommodations for support. If it's something you're curious about, I'm not going to tell you not to pursue it, but you don't need to have a diagnosis to benefit from these tools. People get to a certain point in understanding their own brain and they start to recognize patterns, diagnosis or not. And they start thinking, okay, this might be me. And then they stall out. They don't know what to do. They say, well, I don't have a diagnosis, so I cannot really implement anything yet. I need to wait until I know for sure. And all I want to say is that you do not need a diagnosis to give yourself permission to work with your brain instead of against it. You do not need a diagnosis to tell your manager what conditions help you work your best. Okay? You do not need a diagnosis to build a system that fits how you actually operate. The insight you already have about yourself is enough to start. Start there. Question number 2. I imagine someone who is talented. Oh, I manage someone who is talented, but their follow through is all over the place. What do I do? Okay, first, I really appreciate that you're framing this as what do I do, not what is wrong with them, because framing matters. Here's what I want you to notice. You said their follow through is all over the place. And the question I would ask back is, have you ever really clarified or clearly defined what done looks like for the task you're assigning them? Have you ever asked them what conditions they need to do their best work? Have you ever started a conversation with what would help you follow through on this instead of starting with a missed deadline? Because in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot, inconsistent follow through in a talented person is not a motivation problem. It's a systems problem. The expectations were not clear enough. That is a systems problem. The task had too many steps without enough scaffolding. That was an environment that was not created to handle that load. And maybe they kept getting interrupted in the process, either in person or virtually. So before you go down a performance conversation, a PIP, performance improvement plan, etc., start with the I work best when exercise. That's where I would recommend. Do it with your whole team. Start with yourself first to understand, but do it with your whole team, not just that person. It could be a team-wide practice. Pay close attention to what people say, especially that person that you're concerned about. What you learn from that conversation will tell you far more than any assumption about what is going on with their brain and will give you something actionable, which is ultimately what you need. You could be really surprised at their answers, mostly because sometimes we assume what people need. We might be right. We might be right. And they also need to be able to communicate what they need. If they're constantly saying, I don't know, they need to be able to articulate what they need. Question number 3, and you need to give them an opportunity to communicate it. Okay. Question number 3, how do I talk to my own manager about needing different conditions to work well without sounding like I'm making excuses? I hear this one a lot. This is very common. I want to validate that the fear behind the question is incredibly real. There are workplaces, I've been at them, where asking for what you need does get read as excuse making. The frame up is important. This is real, and I'm not going to pretend that it's not, especially if you're talking about accommodations, formal or informal. Here's the reframe that changes the conversation. So we're going to reframe what you're talking about. Instead of coming to your manager with a list of what you struggle with, which is a version that can still land as an excuse, come with a proposal, a specific outcome-focused proposal. It could sound like this. I've done this with clients before. It could sound like, I've been thinking about how to improve my output on the deep focus work I do. I do my best thinking in the mornings before 11 and when I have back to back meetings in that window. Um, I do my best thinking in the mornings before 11. And when I have back to back meetings in that window, my afternoon work quality drops. Would it be possible to protect my calendar before 11 on Tuesdays and Thursdays for focused work? I think it would be meaningful to improve. I think it would meaningfully improve what I deliver on those projects. This is not an excuse making. This is a performance proposal, and it's in the form of very specific trials. I would hope that you would look at it as, Tuesdays, Thursdays aren't heavy meeting days. Maybe those are a little bit lighter and you can be more flexible. This is a performance proposal, so you've named the pattern, you've connected it to an outcome, and you proposed a contained solution. And you can also frame it up as a trial. You're going to do it for 8 weeks, 2 months, or maybe a whole quarter, because it takes on average 66 days to form a habit. And that includes other people who are going to have to get used to this change. So 66 days to form a habit, you'll propose that you're going to do it for 12 weeks. That's what you're going to focus on, because you're not asking them to understand your neurology. That's not what we want to do. You're asking them to help you produce better work. This is a request that benefits both of you. Question number 4. I'm a leader and I'm overwhelmed right now. I'm dropping things. I'm snapping at my team. My execution, my executive functioning is not working well. What do I do first? Thank you for asking this. The fact that you can name what is happening is super significant. So you do 2 things, and I would recommend starting today. The first is a 2-minute brain preset. So you cannot lead when you're in chaos, okay? Your brain cannot plan in chaos. Before you go into anything, a meeting, a hard conversation, a task you've been avoiding, usually it's not just procrastination's sake, it's usually an emotion attached to it. Side note, I want you to step away 2 minutes. Do box breathing or just take 2 deep, slow breaths. What you're doing when you do that is you're giving your nervous system a moment to come down from whatever it was holding on to. This is not a luxury. That is a precondition for effective leadership. Even if you are not technically leading a group, you're leading yourself. You deserve the best leader. The second thing I would do if you are struggling and with overwhelm and you're dropping things is, now this does take a little bit more courage, is that you name it to one person on your team. You do not have to explain everything. You do not have to disclose anything you're not ready to disclose. You can say something as simple as, I want to give you a heads up that I'm navigating a very heavy period right now, and I'm working on it, and I'm aware of it. If I seem short this week, it's not you, it's me. Okay? That one sentence, it does more for your psychological safety and other people's safety on the teams than almost anything else that I've seen. That vulnerability is important because it models exactly what you want your team to be able to do when they're struggling. And it takes that ambient tension, the thing you can feel, but like nobody can name or takes the time to name, and it puts it somewhere where it's more visible, where it loses some of its power. Regulate first, name it to one person, the rest can follow from there. Thank you for your questions. If you have a question you would like for me to answer in the Q&A section of these episodes, shoot me an email. I'll put it right here on the screen somewhere, and I'll get back to you, or I'll use it in one of the episodes. Leadership Brains is sponsored by Neurodivergent Ventures, where your unique mind is your greatest asset.